Well, good morning, everyone. This is Original Minds. I'm Elia Hallworth, and my guest today is Richard Lang. Welcome, Richard.
Hello.
And we are here doing this by phone. Richard is a somewhat frequent guest on my show because it's always such a treat. I always love it, and I introduce you, Richard, as the Renaissance man, as an artist and a writer and a facilitator for other artists, and you're a gardener. And with Richard's wife, Judith Selby Lang, they are international activists bringing attention to plastic in the ocean. But the reason I love to have him come on is to read aloud his latest writings because it's always delicious. So I'm so glad you have time to join me today, Richard.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
And you and Judith, even in normal times, you're just nonstop creative. So I imagine that's what's going on during this COVID quarantine time.
Well, the line from poet Mary Oliver is, "And what is it? What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" I'm just trying to keep busy.
I just wanted to bring up because we were talking about your children being and your grandchildren being very creative, and that you really created that environment around their growing up, and then we were talking about your parents, and I just, as I said to you, I often talk to artists who are directed away from art most of their growing up and most of their life into something more practical. But you were really nurtured with creativity around you as a kid. Would you just talk about that for a minute?
Oh, sure. No, I'm just the luckiest guy in the world. Um, I grew up in a small town, and my folks were kind of the small town weirdos. And they did things not like everyone else. And frequently at our dinner table were other weirdos. Growing up in a small town and growing up as a Jew in a small town put a certain skew on things. And but my folks were, I would say, collectors of people. They really liked people who navigated by their own lights, and they for 25 years, I think it was, we had foreign exchange students in our house, and that really changed my life. And although it was a small town, my parents were against growing up, raising up a couple of rubes, my brother and me. And anyway, it was a wonderful time. My mother, who had a scholarship to the Art Institute in Chicago, and turned our basement into an art studio. So I always had a place to work.
And you also visited Chicago with some regularity, I think, to see the museums and the music.
Yeah, it was their religion. They weren't very religious people. But there were often trips into Chicago, and the itinerary was first the Art Institute and then Orchestra Hall for a great performers concert, and then out to a French meal. Man, and I thought everyone lived this way.
No, not at all. Most small town people never had those options.
No, I'm really lucky.
Well, I think that story is so relevant now as museums in San Francisco are about to open. And our local Bolinas Museum is looking at how they can open again, and how important that is to be exposed to art and ideas, and the fact that you can access the culture of a city so easily from here. And I hope that we'll be returning to that soon because we all hunger for it.
No, we will. We will. We must keep
Well, so you've been at home creating. Have you got something that you'd like to read to us today?
Yeah, I would. We call this our COVID vacation. Always look on the bright side. Um, so I'm going to read a little story that I wrote when I first saw the fire come over the hill, the Woodward fire.
Yes.
It's called Emanate Delight. It's often an embarrassment of riches to live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, it'd be a crime against forbearance to brag when you already have so much. Redwood forest, monsoon climate, rain in winter, never summer, mountain vistas, the sharp line of the white Pacific as your backyard. Go on, pile it on, but before you stretch out for a long, easy ride, remember this is wildfire country, where at this very minute and second, as I write this remembrance, I can look out my window and see smoke from the Woodward fire just beginning to show over the Alima Ridge about 4 miles away. We are waiting with our go bags. It's a bummer, but troubles like a natural danger help keep awareness quite alive. Earthquake is in the mix. You can do nothing about a windy fire or an earthquake, but you can prepare yourself on the inside. And whatever you need from the material world, you think you might need in your go bag. It's good to have a go bag, but the most important thing is your state of mind. That you can control. It's nature's mindfulness training. All that said, I'm here to say if you ever visit, a ride on the Marin to San Francisco ferry is a must. And to have that ride as your daily commute, well, yes, an embarrassment of riches. My grandfather's first expression of growing wealth found him on various pleasure cruises. His first cruise, not exactly a pleasure cruise, was from Hamburg to Galveston. An expansive cruise, the stuff of legend. To have a cruise as your way to and from work, yes, an embarrassment of riches. Not to mention copacetic politics, a minimizing of the corruption catalog. Did I mention food? Don't bother me, I'm eating. The ferry terminal itself houses a host of farm-to-table yummification. I'm remembering, as I write, an April 1st on the last rain of the season last night, refreshing every molecule of oxygen. And I'm on the 820 en route to my gallery and printmaking studio. A brisk 18-block walk will both energize and fill my exercise dance card. So I'm raring to go and greet my crew and get busy on the latest project. The ferry pulls away from the dock in Marin, gliding past San Quentin, a hive of tragedy and reminder it ain't all sunsets and roses. My walk will take me through the strata of high finance into Junkieville and then out again to the Civic Center Beaux-Arts marker for political pride. April 1st, the first day of National Poetry Month. Poetry's on my mind. It's the Fool's Day as well, my personal national holiday. Cracking myself up. Arriving at the ferry terminal in time to head out through the bottleneck of the exit gangway, 3 abreast, slows the pace to a shuffle. In my trio, 2 are wearing matching corporate ID tags. I overhear. She says, "Oh, what do you do there?" And he says, "Oh, I emanate delight." I turn. "You emanate delight? Wow, you've given me the first line for my poem for National Poetry Month." He would step away if it weren't a crowded crush. "You misunderstood me. I'm an M&A for Deloitte." You could almost hear the warning announcement. Be aware, a deranged man. A deranged man is disembarking the 820. For those of you who don't know, M&A is mergers and acquisitions, a general term used to describe the consolidation of companies or assets through various types of financial transactions. Anyway, that's Emanate Delight.
Oh, and he didn't see the magic in what he'd said. He went right to practical.
Yeah, well, that's all right. The world runs better that way. Keep the artist isolated. We'll all be better off.
Well, since you referenced Electric Works, will you tell folks about what your studio and your art is?
Oh, sure.
At Electric Works?
Well, I'm retired. as
but it's the founder.
I am the founder with my son Noah, and we had a third partner, David Salgado. He should rest in peace. He passed away a couple of years ago, and I had this idea. It's always a trick to make a living if you're going to be in the creative arts. So I was teaching a class at UC Santa Cruz, and one of the students, this is in '92, handed me a print of a beautiful artwork, and it was a print, and it was gorgeous, and it was the way the colors sat on the paper. It just and the range of colors were astounding. And how is this thing done? And he said, well, this is a digital print. And I went, what? How can this be? And so I had been doing lithographs of my own work, which are expensive to do and time consuming, and it'll take the snuff right out of you. And so I had done a series of 4 prints, all based on the idea of surface tension of water. And some of them were lucrative, but I had one that it just didn't go, so I lost money, and I thought, well, this is a terrible thing, so I kind of gave it up. And then this digital print was put into my hand, and I went, wow, there's no upfront cost aside from the equipment. And it was as though the tarot reader had laid out all the cards for my next 20 years. This is what you're going to do. And so we took a lot of crap from the establishment printmaking world. Digital prints weren't real prints. And in fact, the curator of prints at the Achenbach in San Francisco said, we were at a conference, and he said, digital print will never, as he say, will never darken my doorstep. Well, they're avid collectors of everything now, so.
But it was new.
We spent 20-some years. Well, what the digital print allowed us to do was experiment, which is what we love to do. So we did really wonderfully strange and inventive projects that really came right from the source of creative mind. So let's see, we did the world's first scratch-off print.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah. So
it was a beautiful print, like a children's book of a robin on a nest.
Right.
And
exactly.
The person who purchased the print scratched off the eggs to see who you might get in life.
Right.
Is that a good way to say it?
That was it.
It might be a rainbow-colored gay person. It might be brown. It was what comes with life. That was a wonderful one.
Well, one of the funny things about the print was there was a nest of birds, and you could scratch off, and you could get a white, a brown, or a black one. And then up in the corner, there was a thing called a super bonus pick. If you scratch that off, you got a rainbow bird.
Well, it was a beautiful piece of art, but it was also so playful and creative and with a message. I love that piece.
Yeah, so it's a great one. The artist is William Allen, who's one of our great Bay Area treasures.
Well, and you had many remarkable artists coming to you, both people who had never done anything like this and people who were quite famous. And as I recall, you called yourselves the land of yes, because people would come up with wild ideas and you would say, okay, yes.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Which we did, which is a fun thing to do. And, as a kid, I would kind of put myself to sleep trying to invent a steam engine in my mind. How would I do it? So I've had a long life of trying to invent things.
Well, one example that you've used is the artist William Wiley. You made a pinball machine for him.
We did. We did. One of the collectors of the work at our gallery had a Christmas party, and his a pinball fanatic, and he had a bunch of old 1950s pinballs in his basement, and we were down there playing them. And I said, "Hey, Joe, how would you like to publish a pinball machine by a really great artist?" And he said, "Absolutely." And we were off and running. So Joe Sweeney financed the thing, and we made an edition of 8 identical pinball machines. And so what we did is we took a 1958 machine called what was the name of the game? North Star. And anyway, it's a long story, but we ended up doing a pinball machine called OOE, Only One Earth, and it was all about global warming.
Really, really amazing and wonderful.
Yeah.
And that cross-pollination of so many people and ideas. So
Yeah.
Electric Works is still going.
Yeah. Noah and his wife Chris are running it, and they're doing a smashing job.
And so I imagine the gallery isn't open right now, but people can go to the website.
Yeah, no, it's all online now. We closed the gallery down when I guess 4 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And Noah has a house in San Francisco, and they remodeled their basement into the print studio. So, given the state of real estate in San Francisco, it was a wise move.
Because you used to have that very large building.
Yeah, we had a huge space and lots of room, and then all of a sudden wasn't ours anymore.
Time changes.
Changes.
So that's where the name Electric Works came from, right? The name of your company.
Well, the building was the old Bazell Electric Works.
Yeah.
And what they were involved in is refurbishing giant motors that were used on docks for hauling freight and things. And so anyway, they went out of business and things changed, as you said.
Well, thanks for that story. I just think when you were referencing it, it's such an interesting story, and still that creativity goes on.
It does. I mean, that's the whole idea. I can't imagine any greater joy than doing that, than having an idea and seeing it come into the world. It's just, it's the greatest pleasure there is.
And it's something that reaches out to so many people.
Yeah. And now I think the online thing is going to be eventually pretty good. Because I'm involved in a project. One of the artists we show is Dave Eggers, who very incredibly creative guy, and he has a thing called Scholar Match, where he raises money for scholarships for kids who are the first in their family to attend college.
Nice.
And just amazing, all these kids. I mean, if your sinuses need clearing, and and you're in need of a weepy moment, you need to go to the award ceremony and see these kids, testify to their experience.
Well, and we need those moments. We need that reminder, and how taking care of each other and invigorating the ability of someone to have their own vision. We need that. Yeah. We're hungry for it right now.
I think so. I mean, I made my whole life around it.
Yeah.
Right outside of my window, at this very second, I'm looking at a deer we call Nachi, because she's got a big divot torn out of her ear from some bounding through the oak woods. And we call her Nachi, but she is the most prolific, and she's the boss of all the female deer. And she has twins every year in our driveway. I guess she feels some protection there. And,
you might say where you what community you live in.
I live in Forest Knolls.
Yeah, so you're out in the country, and
I
you're
am out in the country.
up on a hill, and you have some isolation, but she must find security there.
Yeah, she does. But anyway, that's by way of saying there's a big buck and there's Nachi, and it looks like the whole thing's going to start up again.
Oh, that's what you're seeing right now.
Right now.
Well, don't you have something that you wrote about Nachi or the deer?
I do.
Oh, let's hear that.
All right. The singular certainty of art and what I am most interested in sharing and is the long genetic march that installed me at this point of poetical understanding. So the deer broke in. Not exactly. I left the gate open for about an hour, and they shouted in their silent way, "We're in!" They shout in their silent way, stealthing their way along on little pointy double toes. What do they go for first? Ignoring cabbages and beans, tomatoes and corns to smorgasbord. It's the roses. You have to admire their taste in licking up the rose blossoms. How can you not linger on the thought of the deer we call Nachi because she has a divot chunked out of an ear by some blind panic move through the tough oak brush? It's Nachi who for 7 years birthed her twins, Spotty and Springing, right at the top of the driveway next to Judith's car, a matrix wagon, it happens. It's where Nachi feels maybe a larger sense of confidence. For every once in a while, a coyote or a bobcat will drag off one of the little darlings. Can you see the matrix, a great metal wall standing between the fawns and the devouring death? So here it is, the mystery of art in a nutshell. Spotty fawns, a driveway, nibbled roses add up to a wash of imagination spilling through you, to float through your mind, to land, to make good on the promise that some things cannot be explained, but simply exist in a vivid way as true as outside your window.
Isn't it true? And we can all relate to it because we have the deer here as well, just part of the community, so confident. And I've seen them go up on decks in order to get roses.
So far we have not been ravaged, although last night, so we have a pretty expansive vegetable garden, only because the thought of making a living with art seemed remote. And so I was at the University of Wisconsin studying sculpture, and of course it's a land grant college, so they have a pretty robust agriculture department. So I minored in vegetable production as that was my fallback.
This is true? I never heard this story.
Yeah. No, I took soil science and all kinds of things.
Little knowing how it would apply to your life later on.
I sort of knew.
Yeah. always produce food.
Yeah. Always produce food. So we make a lot of food here. We're onto grain these days. Growing corn and buckwheat and sorghum as a way to fortify.
How big a plot can you grow like sorghum in and buckwheat?
Well, the sorghum and buckwheat are experimental plots this year. We call our place we call this the Institute of Advanced Visual Studies, after the Princeton organization where Einstein was. We call it the Institute of Advanced Visual Studies and Applied Biology.
And there it is. Sums it all up.
Yeah.
Well, and it's exciting because you're both constantly creating in different projects. I love seeing your studio and the huge metal wall that you put art up on, and you mix art and collage it with magnets to create ideas. It's so exciting.
It's true. It's creating stories is what it is.
Yeah.
And so I have all these pieces of stuff that I've made that kind of sift around and eventually spindle around a thought, an idea, and a feeling. And if I'm lucky, it'll be an artwork.
But I love the idea of cutting up your paintings, which are um, on paper, and reassembling them with new and fresh ideas. And they're very exciting, and because you're very talented and your work is amazing, but the way it becomes layered and different ideas coming out of it and a sense of dimension, that's really exciting.
Well, I'm just trying to recreate the feeling of what it's like to live in my mind.
Very good. That's very good. And upstairs, Judith has that sunny studio where she's working, and the household just it buzzes with creativity.
Well, that's true. It's a great place to live. I am happy beyond its opposite.
Which is what we can all strive for.
Yeah, no, it's easy. There's some simple rules for happiness. We have a few rules for basic living, and a couple of the rules are: one is the ball is always in your court. You can't blame anyone else.
Mm.
Your circumstances can be horrible, but your inner state is up to you. That's pretty much what religion's all about, is changing your internal state so you can navigate a little easier in the world. Not to say that there isn't horrible tragedy, and it's how you deal with it. So the ball's in your court.
Well, it's very true. And the other day when I said that I was feeling sad about the state of our world, you would have none of that. It was, that we wait and watch it unfold, and there have been terrible times in the world, and it really is up to the individual to interact and react.
That's right. So, what is it you were expecting?
Well, what we're expecting is, you never know what's around the corner, except that right now, see how fast time goes. We need to take a small break.
Okay.
And we'll be right back.
Okay.
And I'd just like to thank Amanda, who has been really holding the station together. But as she said earlier on the radio, only Amanda and Jeff can go into the station, but the rest of the staff is still working very hard to keep this station going and bring us both intellectual and creative stimulation. So much thanks to everybody. So back to my guest. You're listening to Original Minds. I'm Elia Hallworth, and my guest today is artist, writer, and Renaissance man, Richard Lang. And Richard, perhaps it's time to have you read something else to us.
Okay. I'm happy to do it. I hear Into the Mystic.
Yes.
Okay. I confess. I have visions. Why does this feel like a confession and not an exaltation? I guess because I come from a family of very practical people. The patriarch had escaped Tsarist mayhem for Jews and worked hard to create a walled city of capital to keep those he cared for insulated from mayhem, Tsarist or otherwise. When I told him I would not be coming into the business and going to art school, he backed away as though confronting an insane person, unpredictable, capable of creating his own mayhem. You're leaving a gold mine. So I was a little equivocal about my visions. It was bad enough to make pictures for a living. I reveled in seeing music and tasting color, which helps in the kitchen. I sometimes like walking in the woods barefoot on a warm day so I can better feel the underfoot as a mental map of texture. I was used to mind pictures, using this to form and reform stuff into the sculptures I would make. It was a labor-saving device to have this mental state. This sense, I've since found out, is called synesthesia. I thought everyone was like this, and probably is to a varying degree, but one evening it came from a very different order of mind. First, I should probably say that along the counterculture meander, psychotropic drugs were often offered and sometimes used to mostly vivid and sometimes positive effect, But this little vignette takes place in a period after son Noah was born and a crawling around little tyke. Laura and I had pledged not to do drugs or alcohol while we were trying to figure out what having a child to raise up meant to our general behavior. Now, think of 23-year-olds having children. Oy vey. We were trying to figure out what having a child to raise up meant to our general behavior. This is the long way of saying that this experience was on the natch. Noah was 8 months old and really curious and generally charming child. Friends visiting up from Chicago were curious and dubious about this new state of affairs for us. Baby? What's that got to do with making art? We were hardcore and dedicated in our cohort and knew no one else in their mid-20s attempting children, plus a life of art making. At this point, we were winding up our stay in Madison. We'd left our little place in the country, though we adored growing a garden, both of us. Wisconsin winters will box the yippee country living right out of you. So we had moved into married student housing for our final semester. Our friends were art grad students at the University of Chicago. We loved arguing about art versus craft, conceptual versus whatever. It was a strange time in the arts. The modern project was over. What's next? The baby was not having it, so I went into the bedroom to see if I could get him to sleep. Sitting in the rocker, I started my breathing exercises. Calm, calm, saying my mantra. Of course I had a mantra, didn't you? The baby finally slumps into that increase of gravity every parent knows and craves. It began with an increase in my own gravitational pull, hands becoming heavy, feeling huge. Then the whole body began to feel heavy. My hands felt like they were the whole body. And then there was a lifting. Yikes, what's happening? Calm, calm, breathe, breathe. My heart was thumping panic as I began to lift from the rocker. Calm, calm, breathe, breathe, mantra, mantra. I was floating near the ceiling, seeing myself seated in the rocker. Then, as though disembodied into atoms up and through the ceiling, to seeing the complex of apartments, and further into the night sky, looking over the planet, and then further up into a fizz of bubbles where I became a bubble among a zillion bubbles. Happy? It was most akin to feeling like you were in love, having the feeling of where feeling like you're in love and having the feeling returned. Then, oh gosh, we have company. The feeling of dropping 20 floors all at once, and I was back in the rocker and out again to join the company. How long have I been gone? 50 years, I think, as I write this. You still with me?
Oh, I thought that was a pause.
No, that was the...
That was it. No, that's, it just yesterday on KQED, I think there was a program that I caught in for a few minutes in the car talking about the use of psychedelics now in healing that is finally coming around. And a person that they were interviewing was trying to describe the grandiosity of the experience. And that was just a beautiful description with just breath of where you can go in your being and outside and inside the body. So thank you. That was lovely.
Well, I have to tell you, I've tried to get back to that bubble land a number of times, and I've never made it.
But, if you experience it once, it's there.
Yeah, I know it's there.
It never leaves you.
And the way my studio is, I can, the pictures do that now.
Yeah.
That magnetic wall that you described, I would call it psychedelic, really. It evokes something, with unenhanced and on the natch, as we say.
Well, and altering reality as you cut up your paintings and place them together and create new things.
Well, don't you think that's the point of art? Is to expand your mind.
Oh yeah, but we all do it in different ways, and there are different mediums, and there's different originality. I just was really taken by that use of a steel wall and magnets.
Yeah.
To recreate to combine your images and realistic images, pulling them together in different forms and imagination. Yeah.
Well, it's true. I call that wall the Large Hadron Collider.
That's good.
After because it really is the reactor core of what I do, and I tell you, this is more fun than anything. Well, writing is pretty fun. How about a story about Bear Valley?
Absolutely.
You should describe what it's like out there now.
I should?
Yeah. What's it like because I haven't been out.
Well, if you're coming down the hill, the Olima Hill down into Olima, you now see the puffs of smoke on the east side of the hills. But during the big fire, boy, from Olima, it was, we got so much of the smoke in Bolinas, and we had the evacuation notice, which was very intense because we were watching on television people's homes burning. But it was if you came up the Olima Valley, the cloud of smoke was mostly on the west side. But when you got to Olima, it was pulsing smoke. It was so present. You felt how close the fire was. And I'm sure Amanda could describe this much better because she lives near that area.
Oh, boy.
But I have not seen, I don't think any of us who aren't involved have seen that the fire came right down so close to the Bear Valley Visitor Center. So when they...
I just want to jump in. I interviewed Christine Beekman from the National Park Service last week, and she was describing, as was someone else who was able to visit the Bear Valley area, Richard, that they've had to cut down a number of the large trees on the west side of the trail due to the fact that they were affected by the fire and were just going to become super dangerous. So that landscape will be pretty changed. And she was describing the fire crews saying that they would have to clear the trees off of the Bear Valley Trail as they went out with their equipment to construct and defend the perimeter line of the containment line. And then they would have to do the same thing to come back out. Wow. So a lot of trees have fallen, but they are saying that throughout the area, there was some sort of extreme fire, and then there was sort of lighter fire within the perimeter, and also that the regrowth has already begun.
Well, and for everyone who lives in that area, the Inverness fire, the big fire, is still on people's minds, and my husband at the time and I drove up weeks afterwards and drove through that area, and it was stunningly bleak. And then within months of rain, it began to change and grow back. So, yeah, it is a process. And for you, Amanda, since you came on, you were right there almost at the edge of the hub of everything going on.
Yeah, and several people have said to me that there was actually another spot fire that was outside the containment area early in the fire process that was put out, but I don't know exactly where that was, but that was even closer to our area where we live. But I must say I have huge amounts of gratitude for the folks who came from all over the country to contain the blaze.
Wonderful.
And in that the update, that one of the last updates, that the leader of the group from Montana, is that right?
I think they were from Great Basin.
Oh, from Great Basin.
The last people who did the live.
Well, he said that in his whole career, he had never experienced such an outpouring of appreciation of signs thanking the firemen that are up along the roads, of people volunteering to bring things. And that was very touching, that it was so significant for those fire people that they hadn't experienced that much local participation. So
it ain't them, it's us.
Yeah. Well,
I think like My cough is from the fire, bringing that smoke all of those days.
Well, and there's smoke coming back to us now from the fires that are still burning.
Well, should we go to Bear Valley?
Yes.
I have a little story for you.
All right.
I keep singing in my head the Frank Sinatra. You know, it's 3:15. There's no one in the place except you and me. So this is a story called Raven. On a walk in the woods with the fresh air made young, this is early spring in California after the rains have largely stopped. All the dust is gone and the leaves are ardent, new, and green. The shiny miner's lettuce and the forget-me-nots are luscious right by the trail. There were a couple of big hurricane-force windstorms this winter. The fiercest winds came only as gusts, but still they were steamroller storms. This year, 2 big firs are down, blown flat, roots up in a 15-foot disc, snaggled and ruined, raised like a giant lid over the crater. A sudden and significant change. I know from all my walks here, this scene of ruin is truly the dust jacket on a novel of absorption and regrowth. 2 guys come walking down the trail, a big blonde dressed sharp for inspection, and a skinny guy, Mediterranean coloring in a stretched and faded t-shirt. The darker guy, stooped shoulders and head thrust forward on a tilted neck, looks like a blackbird from far off, the shadow from the bill of his ball cap enhancing the picture. They're getting closer to where I'm sitting on a log bench. Even closer, the blackbird look persists. Their talk comes into my focus as well. They're in their 50s, colleagues at some school, I think, from the themes of the conversation, loud and oblivious and resonant in the quiet woods. Snatches ramp up toward comprehension. My dim-bulbed TA got herself knocked up. The bitterness of bearing clueless colleagues, all the rancor from working at the narrow trough of petty politics too long. The big blonde guy is pressed and still neat after a long walk. Stan said he really was a creationist. The darker guy rumpled from the vigorous hike. No, what? God, what is happening at that place? Simmering anger builds up, and then, what century are we in? Like a real creationist with Bible stories? Idiot. Can't wait to have a talk with him. Closer now, the t-shirt reveals an Indian motif. The t-shirt is thin and faded from being the first choice in the drawer. It's a North Coast totem of a raven. Sharp geometric lines, black and red on white cotton. It's a Haida raven with a silkscreen photo of a raven sitting on the head, crouched and ready to call out. Raven is the creator of the universe. The creator of the universe who tricked the sun out of his dark box. Raven who scorched his white feathers black, filching the sun, flying through the smoke hole in the big lodge. Creation stories are universal. Asian hierarchy of elephants on turtles, the Greek battle of the Titans, and the Olympians, and for us, the Big Bang and steady state, the string theory of forever, always. Aboriginal Australians, the Nambakula, making people from sticks lying about, moving to endless cycles of destruction and creation, flames and dust. Huitzilopochtli, the fiery hummingbird god of war, born to destroy the world, rising and falling like the 2 downed firs in a constant cycle. The concept of the long haul of forever, always, the hardest thing to grasp in these machine times, but less hard breaking it down, walking in the woods on a damp day.
And so here we are in those times where things fall and grow back.
They do.
Yeah. How about another?
Another?
Another story.
Okay. Well, let's go back to Bear Valley. How much time do we have?
It is 9:48, and we need to stop at 9:58.
Okay. Well, you just cut me off.
And let me just say to folks that you are listening to KWMR Radio, This is Original Minds. I'm Elia Howarth, and my guest today is Richard Lang, artist, writer, and many other things. And he's reading us some of his writings, some of his stories, and it's always a thrill to me. I love it.
Okay, here's another story from Bear Valley.
Okay.
Which was the site of the Woodward fire. Dear Moan, the woods are wet late winter. Every leaf is standing out, glossy and dripping. Trailside, and the little cut made by a winter runoff is a spotty baby deer, dead. Looks like it panicked from being chased and fell down the steep hillside and broke a leg. I've seen them in my yard going from calm to wild, bashing into fences and trees when spooked. They run a tight program and can't tolerate much deviation. I'm charmed by the little black hooves the size of my thumbnail, split for traction. This little fellow had a life, leaping and zigging on toe tips, lithe and elusive. Now it's here and been still for a few days, and it stinks. The head has been gnawed on for starters. The cloud of flies have found a grand nursery. I walk on. Back in a week, things have dried out, son. The deer is now a carcass, pulled and molested. The head's been chewed much more, and the hide has been stripped back. The turkey vultures have been at it. Enough skin has been pulled away to show the bloat of the intestines green with grassy meals. I frequent this trail. It's an easy, flat walk, and even though it's well used, and not the solitary walk in the woods I often like, it feels pristine and wild. I love coming frequently to see the succession of flowers. There's an ancient dogwood 40 yards off the trail, planted on a farm long abandoned. If the weather's been to form, the tree looks like a snowy 60-foot hillside shining through the trees. You ever seen that, Elia?
Yes.
30 days past that, most of the skin and the meat are off, and it's a basket of ribs and spine. The leg bones with the glossy tips look tossed. The bones are not bleaching. Sitting in a wet patch, they have become gray and a little bit black. A small clump of fur remains on the skull, and the zigzag cranial sutures become thin black nervous script. There's no stink left. 2 months now since the fawn died, and I see huffing up the trail an old man. It's a slight rise through here. His gait is off balance and slightly listing with chronic back troubles or maybe a mild stroke. He's got on a translucent white windbreaker over a black sweater. I'm stooped looking at the bones that are left. Just the rib cage with the spine buried in the mud. He stops for a breather and looks down. I'm measuring the ribs with my hands, about the same size. I ask, "Are you from around here?" "Yes," he said. "I had a weekend house here for years, and then finally we moved out here. My wife loved it here, really loved it. She's been dead a year now." "Sorry to hear that," I say. He walks. I wait. His eyes were great, juicy lamps. His eyes were great, juicy lamps of grief. I don't know what he was thinking looking at those bones, but I was thinking one way or another the big shift will happen. And if I can remember this at times when it matters, I believe my life lived well will feel more right. Spring is coming fast, and the little whites are speckling the trail side. The wild onions and the miner's lettuce circle leaves have tiny white blossom stalks in the center. The air is super oxygenated, a little heavy in the evening. Late bird calls penetrate the tree world. Quiet woods in the spring, sparse sounds, sweet smells, the giant dogwood blazing white cloud glowing through the trees. One big branch is split off, peeled away from the trunk, but still attached, alive and fallen, flowering white, held up like a swimmer, keeping his clothes dry. One feels lost most when there's so much to lose. That's why spring is so full of grief. That's why spring can really hang you up the most, says Ella Fitzgerald.
You know, you have such a remarkable way of visually letting us see what you're seeing. Verbally letting us see what you're seeing, and the wealth of rewalking a path over years, and seeing the changes is extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, and let's see how many years. This is my 48th year here.
Yeah. This is a very different visual, but the story of the changing body of the fawn. I put watermelon rinds out where the big half moons, where the deer come here, where there's a deer with three does and three fawns that are here regularly. And it's been so interesting because even if they don't find it, everyone else does. And there are raccoons and foxes and gnaw marks, and then eventually it's the ants, and then the skins just dry up into these tight little husks. And I went out to pick those up yesterday, and looking a little unsightly, and they were filled with a little beetle that had made its home. There were like 50 of them that came falling out because it's made its home there. And, as you've been saying about everything else, how it all gets recycled and used.
Yeah. So I'll say once again, don't worry.
Yeah, it's good to be reminded. Well, we have a few more minutes. Do you have another piece?
Let's see. I'll read you the beginning of the story. This is called Lake Santa at the Edge of Never. So maybe I'll just tell the story instead of read it.
Yeah.
In my, fishing around in your 20s, trying to figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and being addicted to the creative life, because that's really essentially what it is. It's an addiction. And how are you going to manage in the world with that as you're jonesing for it all the time. So in that meander, we thought maybe it would be easier to live with a group of creative people and kind of like a commune. It lasted for a year, and it was an interesting experiment. So I'll read you this little paragraph. My long rapture with the image of the Tetons reflected in Jenny Lake became three-dimensional when I hiked with a pal, Chris, up and around and back down the peak of Grand Teton. Chris and I were at the end of a year, a trail of experiential lifestyle. Our little band of communards had just broken up. We were to rendezvous with the others in the Tetons, but checking in to make the final meetup itinerary, they promised to already be on the way. We're not coming. Long, empty hiss and then silence. It was a moment on the life journey when the trajectory shifts abruptly. So the future filled with happiness, happy ever after commune had been dashed, happily living off on the land, living a life off the grid, at least enough off the grid to feel some separation from the despised world of eco-destruction and the soul-numbing fog of advertising was wishful thinking. Anyway, so this Chris and I, he now lives in Petaluma, decided we were at the Tetons and we thought we would hike up and around Grand Teton Peak. Pretty easy if you go up Cascade Canyon, but if you go the other way, it's a pretty difficult climb, and we had some adventures getting up and around there, but it really washed all of the angst out of us. And we hiked up. There's a series of glacial lakes behind the mountain. We went for a swim in an icebound lake when we got to the top. It was a 3-day trip backpacking. And
well, that's it, Richard.
Huh?
What a clean and crisp way to end our show. We've just run out of time, but will you remember that that's what we're talking about and pick this up the next time you come on?
Sure, you bet.
Oh, yes, because I want to hear the rest of it, but I love that you just blasted into this ice-cold lake. It's very fresh. Thank you so much, Richard Lang, for being on Original Minds.
No, thank you, Elias.
Take care.